All right, here we go. People trickling in. Good to see everybody. Felipe,
Hello.
¿qué tal? Good to see you, bud.
See
Who else is brave enough to put their camera on?
you.
There's Miguel. How you doing, man? Good to see you. Owen, I think
Hello,
it's the first
Oliver.
time we're on a call together. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Yeah, thank you. How are you?
Doing well.
Yeah,
Fred, I
good.
haven't seen you since Portugal. How you doing,
No,
bud?
it's true. Really good. Now feeding some lambs that lost their mothers, unfortunately, but that's also cute.
Mister, who's that? Who are you? What are you doing in our kitchen?
Alberto, glad you were able to make time, bud. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Don't worry, the recording is on.
Yeah, I've noticed.
I've done these entire calls without hitting record, so thank you for reminding me.
Better
Rodrigo, pleasure to
experience
see you. Damien, we don't have your video yet, but good to have you here. Look, I won't take too long. We'll get started pretty soon because I got a lot of material to cover. And as I alluded to in the group, this is going to be the first of a three-part series that is going to give you insights on a lot of the research that I've been doing in order to build educational resources and support mechanisms for those farmers in our community who are working to transition to regenerative management of their land. And today we're going to focus on what it means to measure regeneration. And I'll be going through, well, the complexities of even trying to do something like that, since we all know that A, regeneration is not one thing, and B, it is a process rather than a state. But we'll go into that in just a second. Before we get started, does anybody here have any specific questions that they are hoping to get answered during this call? And this way I can make sure that we make time either in the Q&A session at the end, or I can make sure to highlight some of the things that we cover in the presentation itself to make sure you get your questions answered.
Is it focused on land regeneration in agriculture, also for livestock purposes?
Yes, it's definitely going to have more of an agriculture bend. Now, those of you who know me from before know that I've worked in ecosystem restoration outside of agriculture, and most of these things are very much applicable outside of, explotaciones, working the land for a profit or for a business. But we're definitely going to look at it through the lens of farming.
Yeah,
And maybe you saw the pictures that I posted today. I am doing these measurements on pasture land, so it is definitely relevant to animal enterprises. And in fact, the last week, maybe you noticed I was less active on the group, but I was actually with Alan Savory and some other members of IATA looking at a new farm of some friends of mine in Hungary. So I got some good insights that maybe we'll have time to share as well.
Nice.
Anybody else with specific questions? We'll get started in just a second.
I'm quite interested in how it relates to kind of rewards for regeneration. Like, if you can quantify regeneration, turn that into some sort of, I don't know, eco credit or certification for regeneration or something like that. That interests me. So if that can somehow come into it, then that's interesting to me.
Yes, absolutely. I'll make some extra time. I haven't gone into specifics on that in this presentation, but that's a great one to explore further when we go into the Q&A at the end. All right, we got a good group here, so we're going to get started in just a second. Let me change some of the settings to get this how the recording should look, and I will share my screen. All right, so let's take this from the top. Today, I'm going to cover what it means to measure regeneration, the why, the what, and the how of tracking progress on your farm holistically. There are some observations that I've made as different labels and different movements happen in agriculture. I think we can safely say that conventional agriculture, as we understand that meaning, has been very much optimized for profit, even though it's not often very good at that either. And then regeneration or organic or some of these others have really put the focus on the ecological function of farms and ecosystems. and that's really good too. But I want to open that even wider because sometimes that can lead to blinders that can cause a real compromise in the quality of life that the farmers feel. So we're going to address that too. So quickly, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Oliver Gaucher. I helped to get this community started, and I'm also I've worked on a lot of farms in different countries. I haven't been the owner except for one previously in Guatemala before I moved to Spain. And this is an overview base map of the small farm that I am currently on. This little orange blot right here is my house, and I am on the top floor right there. So this is a very dynamic little place with a lot of little micro ecosystems and microclimates. And so there are many different choices and opportunities that I have for working with the ecology here, but also moving that into the quality of life that I'm looking for my partner, the profitability that I need to maintain this as a business and to, well, just pay bills. And so I have real direct experience, not only in other places where I've worked around the world, but the project that I'm doing right now. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to come from my own personal experience. So first of all, why should we even bother to measure and track our progress? I know from talking to at least a couple of you who are here on the call today, you feel like, getting data and measurements is sometimes not necessary because you're very good already at observing and understanding what's going on in your land. And having a bunch of more paperwork to do or organizational things to wade through is not necessarily going to be useful for you. So why would we do this? Well, first of all, the plan for this session is going to go through a number of steps, and I'll take you in order so that it has a bit of rhythm to it. So you can kind of see where different things that I'm going to address are going to come up. First, it increases our individual and our team awareness of the health and the process that we depend on. By tracking and measuring these things, we get a more detailed insight than what we can just observe ourselves. It also makes it easier to share information about what works, why it works, and the complexity of what you do. That last part is really important because most people who are not involved in farming have no idea of all of the things that you do beyond what it takes to just create a product or create some produce. I know any of you here who are actively farming do so many other things that are not absolutely essential to just creating something that you can sell. And being able to communicate the value of those other tasks that you do, I think is really important, especially for those of us who are engaged in regeneration of ecologies. Now, this also enables you to mark checkpoints and view changes over time. To me, this is one of the real values in monitoring and tracking is because as well as we're able to observe changes over time ourselves, I don't know anybody with a good enough memory to say on this day, things were like this. And compared to that year and go into that level of specificity that is sometimes necessary to really see how your management is changing things beyond how they would just change on their own through normal fluctuations of seasons, timing, and differences in weather. The other thing is that it allows you to contribute to the knowledge and the resources that farmers can access to find success. As I have seen from the conversations in this community, it's very valuable for you to talk about, hey, this is what my pasture looks like right now. This is what the germination rate of what I seeded this season is looking like. This is what my place looks like after rain. And that's great. It's very useful. But sometimes pictures and stories are not enough to give the detail that someone is looking for to be able to make decisions or take advice themselves. And so if you have numbers, if you have measurements that you can communicate, you can give enough specificity that somebody can actually take action on that information and do something with it. So what was your farm like in the past? And I'm going to open it up for conversation for a second here. How many of you have a clear idea of how deep your topsoil was when you started farming, or when you took over the operation from your parents, or when you first moved onto the land or expanded your operation? How many of you know how much effective rainfall there was in the year that you started farming compared to where you are now? Does anybody know any of those things clearly? Did anybody do any benchmarking or baseline data collection when you first started on your operation? No is a perfectly adequate answer, and there's no shame in it. Most people don't do it. But raise your hand if you think-
Usually on some latest fields that I got, but like from the very beginning, it was like just start with it and you have no idea. So it's pretty important because you have nothing to compare. You see improvement, but you don't know from what you started.
Yeah, it's exactly what I think as well. So, you know, show of hands, who wishes that they had that information to compare and look at now? Yeah. Yeah, it would be useful. It would give you insights that chances are, you know, without that information, it's hard to say, you know, this is really how much progress that we made, or this is really the change that happened because of my management and not just because of fluctuations in the weather and the seasons, right? That makes a big difference. What was the farm like generations ago? I mean, you know, if your family was taking records, how far back? I've seen old pictures in black and white where people marked where the topsoil used to be on a lamppost. And I see a person standing next to that lamppost, maybe 4 meters below that mark. That can tell you something. That would be interesting to have access to on your specific plot of land to figure out like, oh, I'm farming on the deep subsoil of where my grandparents used to farm. Interesting, you know? And ultimately, we're trying to answer the question here, have things got better or have they gotten worse? Because if they are getting worse, you want that information so you can start to make changes and adjust the way that you manage so it starts to go in a different direction. The other thing is, are you certain that your management is as effective as it could be? If you're not measuring, you probably don't have a good insight into this. So when was the last time that you measured topsoil depth or soil compaction or aggregate and structure of your soil? And I use these because they're fairly universal across all the different types of enterprises that farmers have. Soil health is going to be relevant to you unless you're running a hydroponic operation. And as far as I know, we don't have any hydroponic operators in the community right now. Everybody else is going to care somewhat about the health of their soil. How are the actions that you take and the products that you're using affecting your farm and business? Can you tell me with full confidence that the amount that you're paying for, let's say, fertilizer or even compost tea, is that really translating into profitability or to plant health or whatever it is that you're using it in order to obtain? Do you have numbers to back up the efficacy of the things that you're buying, the tools that you're using, or the practices that you're trialing out? And how long have you been doing these things the same way? Are you sure that something that worked last season is also going to be effective this season, knowing that there's all sorts of variables that change the circumstances? This is why it's useful to have some numbers to go back to and say, man, when it was really rainy, it was very useful for me to plant cover crops. But this year, we don't have that much rain, and I'm concerned that it'll use up the available moisture in the soil that could reduce the chances of germination of the crop that I just put in, for example, right? These things change from year to year, and something that was effective one year might not work the next. And if you don't have reference to go back on, it can be hard to use that to make decisions. So the other thing is, how do you communicate with your customers and your supporters? Now, some of you are going to be selling to large, let's say, commodities traders who probably don't care that much about the metrics of your farm. But some of you are going to be selling more directly to shops or even directly to consumers. Chances are those people buy from you not because it's convenient. Let's face it, there's grocery stores, there's Amazon and delivery, but because you offer something of value beyond just a product. And one of the best ways to communicate the extra value that you have is to show them through something that is verifiable, something tangible that they can connect to, what it is that you're doing beyond just the product itself. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the complexity of what you manage on your farm is hard to communicate to other people. If they don't have reference of what it means to go out early in the morning and check on, let's say, the dung consistency of your livestock to see how they're digesting, how are you going to tell that to them? And how are you going to tell them that it changes over time as the quality of the forage on your pasture improves? And people want to see conclusive evidence. It's nice to have anecdotes and stories and some pictures, but let's face it, those are pretty easy to manipulate. I've seen before and after pictures of people who regenerated their land, which is the difference of taking a picture in the dry season and taking a picture in the wet season. They didn't really do anything. It just rained more, and so they got more vegetation and greenery. Whereas if you're taking measurements at the same time each year, you can show a clear difference. For example, I'm doing this literally today. This is what my pastures looked like in a transect on the 16th and the 17th of May of 2024. Next year, I'll be able to show a real comparison and configuration of the species of forbs and grasses there, and be able to make some conclusions about what I did and the effect that it had on that space. All right, so those are all reasons to measure. Let's talk about what we should actually be measuring. And how do we know if we're making progress or not? Well, the first question that I really wish more people had a clear answer to is, what does success look like to you? How clear are you about what you want to achieve on your farm? Let's face it, most of us are not in this to make a lot of money. There's way easier ways to make money than farming. And so I have never spoken to a farmer who does not have a core reason for why they are managing the land and doing all of this extra work, especially if they're geared towards regeneration, beyond the financial part of it, right? In fact, I know a lot of them, including myself, who have off-farm jobs to help make the farm work, you know? And so why do we do this? Are you clear about the reasons why you do this? And what tells you that you're doing better or worse each season? Is it just how much you sell? Is it the yield that you get from a crop? Because those are useful indicators. Those are valid. But chances are, if you're especially looking at the health of the ecology on the farm or the quality of life that you and your family enjoy around the farm, those are not the best indicators for those things. And so we need to open up our scope of what it is that we're measuring and paying attention to. And then, of course, what is your best case scenario? Do you actually know what it would look like if you had a perfect season, if everything went really well? I know people who have contingency plans for everything that could possibly go wrong. I have yet to talk to a farmer who has a clear idea of what it would look like if everything went right. So maybe that's something we can explore a little later. All right, so how do we get clearer about these kind of bigger questions? Well, the system that I use and that I help to advocate for with other people is to understand your context. And a couple of you here are very familiar with this idea. And the way that we do this is by building an inventory of what are your resources and your limitations. This gives you an idea of what it is that you can use in order to move forward projects or progress in your operation, and also where you can't go beyond, where it starts to degrade, let's say, your personal finances or your personal energy. And also, what quality of life are you pursuing? This goes back to that previous question of what is your idea of success on your farm? How do you want your life to be around the land and the projects that you have going on? Because I know people who have had very successful farm seasons where they made a ton of money and were completely burned out by the end, and were completely stressed out and had strained relationships with their families to the point of even going into divorce. And I don't think that overall they would consider that success. So what is the quality of life that you want around your farm? And what goes along with answering that question is, what do you need to produce or acquire in order to have that quality of life, especially over a longer period of time? You know, you could overwork yourself like in the last scenario and make a bunch of money in 1 year, but that's not sustainable over time. You're going to burn out. Maybe you're going to get sick and be able, or not even be able to work at all. And so balance is needed in this equation as well. And this is why we work to define a context. Now, in order to make sure that we don't develop any major blind spots in what it is that we're paying attention to and measuring, I look at this through the lens of 3 categories. There's the ecological, which is mostly what we're going to focus on today, because I would imagine that's most of you are wanting to learn on this webinar. The economic, which I would imagine most of you already have kind of a grasp on, otherwise you would not likely still be in business. And then the human community aspect, which I was also just talking about, which has, to me, the most to do with the satisfaction and a feeling of success with each person. And yet, at the same time, is often the category that is most overlooked and that people do not pay attention to or do not consider part of what they're managing on their farm. We'll go more into this in a second. Well, let's talk about the differences between farms, because I've said this in many other scenarios, but a farm is about the most vague thing that you could categorize. Are you managing a whole bunch of livestock on hundreds of hectares? Are you growing vegetables on, let's say, a couple hundred square meters in a market garden? Are you taking care of pear trees that you just got on a farm with, Felipe? These are very different operations, and you cannot necessarily be measuring or looking at the exact same thing and hope to get good insights into how your progress is going. And so first we need to figure out, what is your main enterprise, like what I just talked about? What are your primary challenges? What are you trying to overcome? What are you trying to improve in? And what value do you hope to communicate to others? At some point, hang on one second. At some point, you're going to have to communicate the extra value of what you're doing, or else you're going to be selling at low prices and high volumes. And it's a great way to go out of business. Ask anybody who's tied to the commodity market. And so how do we communicate that? Let's go through a couple of major enterprise scenarios. So livestock. What are some of the best things to be looking at if you're trying to manage for health of pasture ecology? Well, pasture health and forage access, and we can go into the how in the next section. Animal body condition is a really good indicator of the health of your livestock, and this applies for pigs, cattle, sheep, chickens, everybody. Fertility rates. How well are they able to reproduce throughout the seasons? Now, maybe you're not breeding for reproduction, but it's still one of the indicators. Hanging weight at harvest. That's basically the same as net yield for a single carcass if you're harvesting for meat. And then if you're not harvesting for meat, things like the average egg, milk, wool production, the things that you get on a periodic basis. Let's talk about arable crops. So one of the most common ones when you're first starting out is germination rate. Is the quantity of seed that you put in the ground actually turning into plants? That's a good one to pay attention to. Then you can go into growth rate throughout the season. Is it growing at the speed that it's supposed to in order to be able to harvest at the time that you predict? It's really important to be able to time. Let's say you're renting machinery. You don't know when to actually get it on the field if it's not growing at a certain rate. Brix reading. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the refractometer, and the Brix chart is an indication of, well, mostly it's an indication of concentrations of sugars in the sap, but there are some other fluctuations that can affect it, such as mineral content and I forget some of the other nutrients that can throw that off. Yield, of course, is the most common one, but it's certainly not the only one. And if you optimize for yield, chances are you're going to expend something else. And then, of course, pest vulnerability. If you're not paying attention to this throughout the season, it could really cut into what you're able to harvest at the end. Tree and perennial crops. Well, fruit set and fruit size and quality, depending on what it is you're selling. If you're selling it to be eaten fresh, in the case of like apples or pears, or if you're processing it for oil, like in the case of this picture for olives, all of those affect the quality of the product you're coming out with. Tree or shrub health and growth rate. This can be measured with things like the Brix meter or sap analysis, but again, we'll go into the hows a little bit later. Irrigation needs. Part of this has to do with root health, and there are a few other extrapolations of health of the plant that irrigation can give you a window into. And bud set in the fall, especially for fruiting trees, oftentimes you can tell how good a season is going to start the next year by looking at the bud set on the trees or the bushes in the fall before the next season. So again, those are just some of the major categories. Let's talk now about how you can measure the health and the progress of your farm. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. So of course, going back to the essentials, I will repeat this because most people start to measure without doing this first. Knowing and defining your goals and your vision through the development of a unique or a holistic context is really important. This gives us the whole scope of what we are trying to manage, not just the ecology or the yields from our farm. Knowing your context and clearly communicating it with your team gets everybody oriented towards the same goals. Part of the value in making this document is getting everybody that you're working with, whether it's your spouse or whether you have employees or whether you have distributors that you need to coordinate with, oriented towards the same goals. If you're oriented towards different goals, you're going to be pulling energy away from each other and working against each other. Once you have a clear vision of your context and your goals, Then you want to decide on the metrics for success that are unique to you and how and when to track those. So your metrics need to give clear and verifiable insights into your progress towards your unique goals. If what you're trying to optimize for is quality of life, and the only thing that you are paying attention to or measuring is yield, chances are you are not going to reach that quality of life because that is not a good indicator for what you're trying to optimize for. Also, if you're trying to increase profit, yield is often a very poor indicator of profit. You can spend any amount in order to obtain a yield, but if it costs more to produce that than it does to obtain it, or sorry, to sell it, then you are going to be, well, you're going to be in debt. You should also have the knowledge and the equipment to do your own measurements at the right time and in an accurate way. If you do the right measurements at the wrong time or in a sloppy way, the information you get is basically useless. And it cannot be relied upon. Ultimately, you need this information to give you insights into your management, not to send out a report. I'm sure, let's say some crazy person signed up for, I don't know, carbon credits, and they needed to send a bunch of documents in at a certain amount of time. Like, yes, you need to do that for those verifications, but you also need to make sure that the information is valid for your own reasons. So don't give me the excuse of like, I just need to do this fast because of reporting standards. No matter what you're gathering, if it is inaccurate, it's better not to do it at all. You also need to plan for measurement and monitoring in order to get valuable information on time. Again, accuracy and timing. Otherwise, it's useless. So planning ahead for when you need to do those monitoring, when getting that information is valuable to make your decisions, is just as important as doing the test right. Well, let's talk about taking baseline data and measurements. This is what I was doing all day, and that's what those pictures were that I put in the chat. So these are really important to get you started. This gives you important snapshots on your current farm health. Just like I was talking about earlier, don't you wish that you had some baseline information from when you first took over management or when you first bought the land? Well, you're definitely going to kick yourself in 5, 10, 20 years if you don't get it now. So it's one thing to wish you had it from before, but you got to start at some point so that you can have it in the future. Now, some of these are going to be one-time measurements and others are going to change and evolve over time. This good example is soil geology versus soil organic matter. Soil organic matter can change multiple times in a season. It fluctuates quite a bit based on how much it rains, if there's good root exudates in the ground, and many other factors, temperature, breathability, presence of microbes and fungi, and all of that. So that needs regular monitoring. Soil geology is not going to change. No matter how much I work to improve my soil, it is not going to stop being granite sand. That's just the baseline. It's not going to change. I only have to do that once. Now, this baseline gives you a starting point so that you can see the change in the areas that are important to you. Remember, the ones that you are going to measure have everything to do with your personal context and your personal goals. So let's go back to those 3 categories that I mentioned. I have put out what I think are universally useful metrics that everybody should be paying attention to if they are managing land. This is where I would not distinguish between farms and, let's say, rewilding projects or ecological restoration operations. Water infiltration, essential. If water is not getting into your soil, it does not matter if it rains. You're going to be in a drought regardless. Soil compaction very closely relates to effective rainfall and water infiltration, but it also has a lot to do with the breathability of soil and the ability for microbes and fungi to actually live. They need to exchange air, usually oxygen, down to a certain level or they will not be present. Soil aggregate is probably the cheapest and easiest way to get an indication of the activity and the presence of microbes without getting more expensive equipment or lab tests. That's why I've included it here. And for baseline measurements, you could do biodiversity surveys. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and some of them are tricky. Some of them are fairly easy. Vegetative ground cover in different transects, and I'll go into examples of that because that was literally what I was doing today. Soil geology and mineral profile, especially as a baseline. Like I mentioned, I'm farming on granite sand. That's never going to change. It's good to know that from the beginning. It can determine what likes those conditions. It can give you an insight into the baseline pH that you're working with in order to select crops that are appropriate to your soil, and so on. Let's look at the economic, because I don't care how good your ecology is doing. If you are in debt and your business is failing, chances are you're not going to keep managing that land for very long. So these are pretty standard. This is not very unique to farming. And yet I have known most farmers not to have a grasp on these numbers. Either they're paying somebody else to do it, or they've got software or an app and they are not aware of these numbers. So it's good to pay attention to these. Assets and liabilities. This is basically the value of what you have on your farm in machinery, in land and whatnot. Liabilities are things like debt. Profit and loss, this is something that you look at probably every month or every quarter. Gross revenue, this is like sales before you reduce for all the overhead costs. And then operational costs, this is a grasp of all of your reoccurring expenses, either fixed or variable. And baseline measurements here could be operating capital, mostly what you have in your bank account that you can actually use for the necessary cash flow to keep things moving. Assets and inventory is very similar to assets and liabilities. It's an inventory of the things that you have and how much it's worth, as well as how they depreciate over time. Profit and loss statements and gross sales from last year, so that you have something to compare to this year as a benchmark to see if you're doing better or worse. Human community, this is the one that everybody thinks is important and nobody measures. So I have made some questionnaires, some surveys to make it easier. Now, because these things are very subjective and personal, there's any number of ways that you can measure them for yourself. And in the program that I host, I can give you insights and guidance on how to make this personal for you. But I've also given some basic questionnaires so that you can get started. Things like personal health surveys, farm team. This could be your family, this could be your employees, this could be your contractors, whoever. It has a lot to do with like job satisfaction and retention rates, which is really important if you want to keep good health. And wider community health. A lot of us that I have talked to care about positively influencing the health of their communities and are not measuring anything to see if they are having an impact or not. So this is a good place to start. And I've also created some surveys for overall community health scores, things like security, access to resources, feeling of connection, and community around you. Again, these are going to be subjective, but it gives you a place to start. And I really encourage all of you who are really committed to regeneration to look at human community health, because of how much it has to do with the quality of life that you experience in your operation. So what do I actually recommend? I gave a lot of very large overview ideas there that are somewhat, let's say, vague, right? And these are the ones that I'm actually doing currently. These are literally pictures from today. And this is an overview of a transect right here. I'm taking measurements of soil, of plant root depth. This is looking at the sward within these transects and taking pictures here. These are the baseline ones, and I have purposely focused on what is low cost, low tech, and easy as far as the amount of information or training you need to be able to do them accurately. Because I don't care how specific and detailed, let's say, a lab test or satellite data is. If you can't afford it, if you don't get it on time, and if the technology stops working, they are effectively useless. And so being able to go out into the field, identify plants, take soil samples that you can observe with your own senses is 100% where I would start. And from there, you can branch out into higher tech, more expensive ones, but you need to calibrate your own 5 senses before you start going into technological solutions. So like I recommended before, compaction, you can take a visual assessment of aggregate in the soil. Earthworm counts are a big indicator of the presence of active biology because that's what they feed on. Insect counts and identification, some of them are predatory, some of them are going to damage your crops. Getting to know your insect populations is very good. Rooting depth, topsoil depth, nodules in your legumes. Everyone thinks, oh, plant legumes, it'll add nitrogen. Not in all circumstances. There are plenty of legumes along in my pastures and I just looked at the nodules, they're not, well, in a lot of cases, they're not there. And the ones that I broke open were white, which means they're hardly fixing any nitrogen. So something is broken in that cycle. Rhizosheaths show the rhizosphere around the roots, which indicate the bacterial communities and the proper cycling of nutrients in your plants. You could do a texture test, start to form a ribbon with your hand to figure out what concentrations of minerals like clay, silt, and sand there are. You can also do that with a jar test. And all of these things I go into detail and can share links on how to do. Infiltration for water, aggregate through a wet slake test, which is a little more accurate than just observing it. Water absorption, and the one bit of technology that I do really like is the microbiometer. Some of you might be familiar with this little test kit. It gives you insights into the fungal bacterial ratio of your soil, which is a great indicator of biological health within the soil. And the reason why I like it is because you can do it at home with very little knowledge. I even made a tutorial video on this. And it costs around 10 euros per sample, depending on how large of a kit you buy in bulk. And compare that to sending it off to a lab, it's extremely cheap. This is the very ugly spreadsheet of all of the research that I've been doing on all of the possible metrics that you could be gathering information on and how they correspond with ecosystem health or financial health or community health. And I've started to color code them based on price, ease of knowledge, and accessibility. I'm going to make this more attractive. And over time, we're going to put this onto an app. So it's a really easy function to search. Just know that this is what I've been spending a lot of my time on over about the last 6 months. And this will help you to understand the range of options of what you could be measuring based on what's important to you in your operation. And this is what the Farm Health Report Card tool that is currently in early stage development looks like. I know, Alberto, you were on the last round of the program and you gave this a whirl. You know it's still in early development and we're going to make it better over time, but this is what we're trying to build in order to make this process as easy as possible. Because one thing that I've learned is that most farmers are not measuring things on their farm. And if they are, they're doing so mostly with observation. Those who are actually doing proper measurements struggle to organize and manage all of the data in a place that makes it easy to access. And those of them who do have good organizational protocols and actually have access to their information struggle to communicate it. And so what we're building here is trying to address those difficulties that we've been finding through conversations with our community members. Here you can enter all the basic information for your farm. This is an example from my own. I'm right up here in this little window. The primary production for your enterprises can be put in here, information on your landscape, your business structure and your resources, your climate, all of the contextual data that gives, well, context to the measurements that you'll be taking over time so that if you want to share this with someone, they can understand, oh, cool, this is their operation, this is their climate, this has something to do with the results that they're getting in their measurements. And we're creating a central dashboard so that it's easy to see visually all of these different measurements that you'll be taking over time in one place and be able to compare them with others. So how does improvement in soil health affect, let's say, personal health for myself or job satisfaction for my employees? How does, let's say, livestock body score translate into profitability of my enterprise or cash flow each month? Being able to compare these things is really where you get management insights that can show you how to more effectively manage your farm. And so this is a lot of information. How are we actually making this available to the community? And this is where we go into the program. If you want to get firsthand account of what it is like to be a participant on this program, I encourage you to reach out to Alberto later, and I can put you in touch with other people who have been on the pilot one. But the idea here is that this is not an online course. In some ways it feels like it, but it's not knowledge intensive. I am not going to try and teach you how to farm. There are too many different types of farms. There's too much information out there. We all have access to Google and YouTube. If I was trying to give you information, I would never be able to keep up with the new stuff that's coming out. Instead, Most of us are actually overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there. And so this program is designed to give you a decision-making process that helps you to filter and assess the information that you have available, whether it's relevant to your context, whether it fits within your priorities as a farm. It's meant to be customized. It gets rid of all of the regen jargon, which can be alienating from some people. And we talk about the concept of health rather than this undefined idea of regeneration that's different for everybody. And ultimately, it is a learning cycle that will help to give some structure to the things that you're already doing and just make them more effective. The simple version is that there's 5 steps. You start by creating a unique context, which helps to inform the metrics and measurements that you will select, which is based on the idea of unique success that you have for your farm. Based on those metrics and measurements, you will build experiments and management plans for your farm so you can test if what you think you know is actually effective based on what you care about on your farm. From there, you go into planning for implementation and monitoring so that when the growing season gets underway, you've got all the materials, you know who's in charge, you know when you need to do it, you put it in your calendar and you just make it happen. And then at the end, you reflect on those learnings and then go back to make revisions and create new plans for the next season so that you're always going in a loop of learning, reflecting, and replanning. And since the journey looks different for everybody, we have a whole bunch of resources to help you to customize the process. You can connect with a consultant or a specialist. You can join the largest network of professionals in Europe, which I'm more than happy to connect you with. We've got consultants, coaches, people all over Europe who can help you with your very specific situation. We've got specialist attention for advice and for troubleshooting if you just need a one-off answer to a question. And of course, ongoing support for long-term results if what you want is assistance periodically over longer periods of time. This could be with online courses that I could help to recommend based on our network. Maybe matching you with a mentor who has more experience from the community. There's a lot of different ways that this could look. And the idea here is to compare, contrast, to learn, and to grow. This is already happening in our community, but I want to make it more effective and useful by integrating real data, real experience, and verifiable measurements so that when you make recommendations in the community or when somebody has a question, we can share things that anybody else can recreate, that they can test, instead of, I saw this one link somewhere, maybe it'll work for you, or I heard a buddy who did this and here's a picture. That's useful, but we can do better. So seeing what other farmers around you are doing with similar contexts and what they're achieving is possible through this platform. Because right now, I don't know, what do you see in the WhatsApp group? A phone number? Do you have any idea of who's there and where they are? Whereas as we build profiles on this new platform, you'll be able to click on someone that you're having a conversation with, see their experiments, see their data, see their context, and really understand what information you can use yourself and if it's applicable to you. And from there, you can get better advice from experienced farmers. You can exchange contact and knowledge and see other people's trajectory. Maybe someone's saying, yeah, I'm trying this out on my pasture, and you look at their data and their soil organic matter is going down consistently. And you're like, well, okay, I'm going to try not that. So this is where it becomes useful. And the idea here is just to find the resources and create the journey that is right for you. This process, like I said, is really customizable, whether you are in a livestock organization, or whether you're market gardening, or whether you're taking care of tree crops. This same learning cycle is going to be relevant to you, and you can make it customizable for however you want to use it. And if you want to go deeper into this, the way to sign up is, well, I'm going to share a link in just a second. I've got that in the next page. Let's see where we're at. This is that crazy database of all of the factors and the measurements. Where is the other one? It's really hard when the share button is hiding there we go. So I will share this link right now in the chat and we will move into Q&A. Any questions so far? I know that was a lot. So we can take a minute and keep in mind too that we'll be going deeper into some of the aspects of this in the next two calls. The next one, I'm going to be going deeper into how to design experiments and run real tests where you can test the different practices or the different products that you might be trialing out to see if they work for you based on the things that are important for you to measure. And then the last of the three calls will be going into project planning and making sure that things flow well during the season.
I was going to just quickly ask something because I was making notes on the 5 steps and I only got the first 3. I was just going to ask what the last 2 were.
Oh yeah, let me go back to that.
Sure.
And keep in mind too that I'll also repost this video recording as soon as we're done, which you can review. But let me quickly open that back up. Well, the last 2 steps are planning and preparation for implementation and learning and revision. And then you go back through the cycle of reviewing your context, deciding on metrics and so forth.
So planning and preparation for implementation and then learning and revision.
Yes, exactly. So you review your data there, you figure out whether what you were trying worked and give you the information you want, or if you need to adjust your plan and do something different.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the idea is that there's like templates and questionnaires and everything to make each step of this process as easy as possible. So it takes the guesswork out. You just go through the motions and the learning journey is hopefully increasingly automatic and you just get better at it over time. And this is exactly what I'm doing for the development of my own farm here, so I can speak to it from personal experience. And
yeah,
Owen, you had also asked about how this fits in with certification systems. Was that right?
yes, yeah. Because if you're measuring all these things, if you have a big enough basket of metrics, then there are these kind of. It's still a bit of a wild west at the moment, but like
Yes.
there are companies that do want to take these broader basket of metrics, like the ones you mentioned, turn it into a more representative metric, not just something reductionist like carbon.
Yes.
And then to some degree kind of monetize that so that people can be paid for the benefits they offer for the common good and things like that. So I don't know, I guess that would have to be like highly formalized to actually become like a solid metric. But yeah, I just wondered how that would fit in with any metrics that you know of or anything like that.
Yeah, this is a really valid question because these certification bodies and these different requirements that you need to meet in order to participate in different eco schemes. I mean, the CAP is evolving all the time and have their own criteria and such. This is changing all the time. And I've done my best to stay abreast of at least the major ones. So there's regenerative organic certification from the Land Institute in the United States. There's EOV from the Savory Institute. There is, and I link to all of these in that spreadsheet because I am using their metrics and their broad scale way of measuring things to inform that spreadsheet of all of the different things you could measure. And that's why that spreadsheet is so large, because I've integrated as many of them as I could find reliable ways to measure into. And then that's where the color code comes in too. So like, if you can only do this through lab results, well, then it gets a high cost, high difficulty rating or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that's a space I'm quite interested in, how to make it cheap
Yes.
and ideally decentralized.
Yes.
But while still being like consistent at the same time and scientifically rigorous enough for people to actually pay for it and think, oh, this is solid enough to monetize in some way.
Yeah. And again, because so many of these different certification schemes are new, I can't really make a recommendation on which one or if you should go for any of them, because it's hard to say if this will lead to economic benefits, if it makes it easier for you to get paid properly for the extra value you're putting in your product. For example, like the Savory Institute and their EOV system offers you land to market access, and they have a coalition of buyers that are willing to pay premium for people who are getting these measurements. The problem, or I don't want to say the problem, one of the caveats that goes along with that system is it's quite expensive to get a certified auditor out there and do this work because it's extremely detailed. I know that because I'm certified in it. And
Oh, right, okay.
yeah, it's an extremely detailed process. And you have to decide for yourself whether that's worth it for you. And honestly, you would have to do that for any of these other certification schemes. I can also speak from experience from our own Carbon Plus program, which requires quite a lot of documentation. And we also integrate satellite monitoring in order to verify some of the things that we ask farmers to give us information on. And there's also periodic auditing from an agronomist on our team that goes out onto your field and ground truths the data that we get from satellites. So our system is also very involved.
Is that Carbon Plus grasslands credit?
It is indeed. It's not necessarily just grasslands. We certify lots of different types of enterprises, but at the moment we only have the system modeled for a couple of biomes. At the moment, they're all located in the Mediterranean region, and we're currently in the process of mapping out the other biomes to be able to certify those as well. But it's just where we're at. I can tell you.
No, go on.
Oh, I can tell you that a lot of the things that the agronomist will do on your land when they go out there are also the ones that I recommend and we have mapped out in this program. I foresee the possibility, if we are able to develop the digital side of this the way that I would like to, is being able to have a lot of these different certifying bodies on a checklist when you create your profile and say, like, okay, I'm participating in Carbon Plus. Check a button and your dashboard is automatically populated with the information that you need to put in and the timing and the instructions of how to do it so that it's automatic and you get reminders. Same with EOV or whatever scheme that we're able to integrate into the platform so that it takes all the guesswork of when do I do this, you get it automatically put into a calendar. This is where I would like to see it developed. It's still a long way off.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Actually, I think we should have a chat at another point actually about its application to desert regreening and how they can create some desert regreening metric. It's something I'm very, very interested in. So yeah,
definitely. And just like you said too, I'm also very passionate if you can find any types of measurements or tests that you can do that are low cost, low tech, easy to access, we'll find a way to integrate it into at least the spreadsheet, if not into the digital tool itself.
No, okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. That's good.
So does that answer your question for now?
It's given me yes, it's given me enough. It's probably given me more questions, but in a good way.
Sure. Well, look, let's see if anybody else has questions because I don't have a sharp cutoff on the hour. I want to respect everybody's time, so I'll get the important stuff wrapped up in the next 7 minutes. But I'm also happy to stick around and go into deeper topics if people want.
Okay, that's good.
Anybody else got questions on at least the topic that we covered right now? On things that you want to measure, if you have specific ideas about something on your farm that you think you would like to get insights on? Damien, would you be interested in learning how to organize the collection of balls, hats, and other things that you have behind you?
Yeah, background is always important. You know?
I'm thinking about context-specific things for you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's super interesting. I joined just to see what exactly you're working on. I've been like a silent observer of everything that's happening in community, and it's really great, especially because it's European focus. I'm outside of European Union, but still close to it. And
where are you?
I'm in Serbia.
Okay. Well, look, we're not exclusive to the European Union. We're open to the whole continent. I think the farthest person we've got to the east is in Georgia. So we definitely are happy to have you and your perspective and your community here as well.
Sure. It's I'm also building like a platform that's similar features that regenerative, whatever it's called, climate farmers. Yeah. And this is also interesting for me from that perspective as well. Super passionate about this stuff. So I'll be glad to join all the initiatives that you'll be having. Thanks for everything.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for being here. And let's definitely connect more. I'd love to hear about what you're working on as well. Frederick, sorry to see you go. I'm gonna address your question right now if you want to stick around for just a second.
Yeah, I'll stick around for a second.
All right, sorry about that. So you said I'm working with a few
Alright.
regen farms in the EU and the financial management side. That's right. So you're keen on understanding how your other farmers do it
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead and elaborate on
just
that.
wanted to hear, like, I guess I just wanted to hear, because that was part of the topic for today, right? So I just wanted to hear, like, is this something you're going to talk a bit more about in this series at some other point, or? Yeah, because I'm obviously quite keen to understand how people are currently doing it and how much success they're having with it and so on. That's really just, yeah, I'm quite curious about that.
Yeah, well, look, anybody else here can answer that. I was not planning on going deeper into the financial planning and measurement part. It's not my area of expertise, and I'm still developing that further with some other financial experts, including perhaps, or maybe you weren't in the community yet, but we did a webinar recently on farm financial management with Julia Shanks.
Okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, so this is something that's definitely interesting. So anybody here, if you want to give an insight onto how you're managing your finances, we can definitely talk about that.
Sounds good. All right. Did you record the other webinar?
Yes, yeah, I can share that recording with
Okay.
you. Mhm.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thank you so much.
So I know Herberto has the luxury of his wife being an excellent financial planner. I don't know if
Also-
everybody else has that luxury.
I can also share with you, Frederick, it happens that my wife also has a accounting and finance field, and she's doing it herself.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
such an asset.
It's a good luxury. And are you using then an accounting system in combination with an Excel sheet or something like that?
Excel sheet, yes. But that's the
Yeah,
only thing.
okay.
I mean, she's new in agriculture. I'm
Okay.
raised in a farm, so we are sort of mixing those things together. We come from different backgrounds.
Nice. I'd be quite keen to see like how you're like what you're measuring and how you're doing it. We can
Yeah,
share some
sure.
notes.
Like I'm very keen for this program, as Oliver is mentioning. I'm very kind of motivated to do it because
Yeah.
I'm in a new project, I'm new region though. Like I have just started in a new area here in Spain. I'm from Mexico, coming from a conventional field, and but yeah, I mean, at the moment there is not much to share, if I can say it in that way.
Okay.
But yes, happy to share whatever any insights.
Vale, pues hablamos luego.
Claro que sí, con
Vale.
gusto.
Excellent. Anybody else insights on how you're managing your finances or any other questions? I'm also happy to wrap this up with the end of the time unless there are more questions, but I'm also happy to go longer if people want to discuss some things.
I was just also going to ask for these community of consultants and thing that you were talking about. Is that the climate farmers list that was drawn up a while back? Because I
Yes,
think I signed.
it's the one that you are on. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just wondering if it was that same thing. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. No, that's
Yep.
good.
Yeah, we were making that like a whole feature of the community for a while, but honestly, we just didn't get that enough people signing up to make it grow as a program. But we still have the database and the connection with all the people, so we can make personal recommendations even if we don't have it built out as like a feature on the website.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I've also found too that when it comes to like coaches or consultants, a lot of people don't know enough about the help that they want or need to be able to get specific about who they should talk to. And it helps to have an intermediate, but we never found a way to make money in having those intermediates in order to justify the time put into it. So that's,
Maybe, I don't know, taking a cut or something.
yeah, exactly. And it never felt right to take a cut because farmers don't have extra income and consultants are usually pretty competitively priced already. So we just couldn't make a business case for it, but we still have all the information and I can still make recommendations.
Yeah, no, that's. I know there's a more UK specific thing where they're starting to like. I think it's called Routes to Regeneration, and they kind of like. I think their plan would be to build like a network of independent consultants and
Yeah.
like they pass you through to those kind of things. So yeah, I think that model is taking off, especially as people are just so desperate to find out things about regenerative agriculture. But as you say, the people that are really lost don't even know what it is that they want to do because they don't have that foundation. But then you have programs like this that go through the whole holistic context and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can then actually guide them to the right person and stuff like that. So I guess it's actually pretty win-win as long as you can financially sustain itself.
Yeah, and you said it correctly. Like sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And honestly, all of the things that we learned from trying to launch that program is the reason why I built this program instead, so that people get the base understanding about what's important to them and where they should be putting their time and effort and what they should be paying attention to. And I think from there, it makes much more sense. And you'll have a better insight as to, okay, this type of specific help is what I'm worth, or what is worth putting money into or investing time in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah, other than that, I was just going to talk about what we're talking about to do with the Carbon Plus stuff. So like I'm super interested in Alan Savory's son, Roger Savory, has a plan. He has this project called Fixed Deserts, and the idea is to essentially grow extremely biodiverse hay, or not just hay, but literally like a mix of like 120 different species, kind of a perennial crop as such, kind of cut and grow back type thing, and essentially turn that into bales and roll them out and bale graze the desert with huge numbers of cows, man-made desert areas, to essentially kickstart the regeneration of like high density bale grazing and dunging and trampling on that desert to turn it back into quite rapidly back into grasslands, because there's like
Yep.
all this dung and stuff like that, and then follow them up with chickens, I think, to spread the manure around. But yeah, essentially an outdoor CAFO, but like much better in a sense, and it could potentially regenerate hundreds of thousands of acres each year if it was done at a large enough scale. Yeah, it's an interesting model. Like independent farmers would sell their cattle to him, and he would just kind of finish them in the last year. So it would be that kind of model. And it's super interesting. He's got loads of podcasts up about it. But I was wondering how a model like that could benefit from some kind of grassland carbon or biodiversity credit, because it's not exactly a grazing credit, because they're not grazing what's on the land, and it doesn't quite. I've read through the Carbon Plus grasslands methodology for the Regen Network credits, and they just take into account. There's a few things that you have to like enter that aren't quite compatible with what Roger Savory wants to do, but nonetheless, what he wants to do could be a massive absorber of carbon. So I'm just interested in how that model could apply for some sort of regenerative credit of some sort, and make money that way as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. This is I should probably stop the recording here, but I am not a huge fan of credits and different schemes to incentivize people to do the right thing. I think if you can't, like, those things justify themselves when you start to take away the levers that create an uneven playing field for degenerative enterprises.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest ones being the subsidy systems in Europe, the United States, and other places. Like, if you just stop making it competitive to have degenerative, unprofitable businesses that limp along with public money, all of a sudden you don't need to pour a bunch of private money into kickstarting regenerative enterprises. So
yes,
as much as you could kind of have these like wimpy little incentives, because honestly, the money that I've seen that comes from these things is not interesting enough to actually go all in on them. It's a good way to get some extra benefit if the enterprise is already working.
Yeah.
You can't really keep a business afloat on those alone. And so rather than add a little trickle of incentive, let's start to take away all of the levers that make it unprofitable to begin with.
Well, this is what Roger Savory said himself when I was talking to him. He's not doesn't seem to be particularly interested in it. And it kind of does make sense why he wouldn't be, because as you say, it's like at the moment it's really not offering to bring much in. However, he wants in order for this to work, what I've heard from the podcast in which he speaks about it, he would need California, which is where he wants to do it, to change their subsidies to subsidize the growing of this hay. Well, he calls it the biocarpet. So because the system is so skewed to be profitable at all for the farmers growing the food for the cattle, they would still need to be subsidized, but they would need to be subsidized for their kind of regeneration, or just for growing things regeneratively. So yeah, and then that way it would be profitable. But the way I see eco credits is that I completely agree with you. They shouldn't be necessary, but I like to prepare for all eventualities, and I like to build like a net of insurance, like just in case the world doesn't become holistic managers rapidly in the next few years, and
Just in case, yeah.
in case that doesn't happen,
Yeah.
should we look into these kind of more reductionist, kind of almost pessimistic ways of incentivizing it, like we pay if you bring nature back, sort of thing? It's not exactly in line with my ideology, but I try and not let that get in the way of reality, and like I try and just see things how they are and how we can work with incentives the way they are as a kind of backup, as I say, in case the world doesn't go regenerative rapidly in the next few years.
Yeah, for me, and I'm happy to open this up to whoever else is on here. I know, Herberto, you had your hand up for a second. I'll just say one quick thing is, I'm really a fan of the yes and option. So, do the good work and get all the free money for the things that you qualify for and on the way to get there. But don't use them as the reason to do it, because it's quite likely that most of them will either evaporate within the long period of time that managing landscapes takes, or the technology to verify them is going to fall through or isn't good enough in even now.
Yeah.
There's such weak programs when you look deeper into them. And there are a few of them that are really going for integrity, and it's part of the reasons why I still work for Climate Farmer. It's like, it's shaky, but this team is really trying to do it at the highest quality possible within the limitations of the technology and the small amount of financial incentive that is currently available, in the hope that this could be a real driver in the future. But most of the other ones are not even trying that. They're just jumping on the bandwagon because there's this like bubble in the market right now, and they think they can make a bunch of VC money and sell, and then hang out in coffee shops in Berlin. Like, this is a yes and thing. Go for it, but it can't be the main thing that you're going for. It's not going to drive the operation.
Not holistic, no, but it's just it's an interesting option, as you say. If you can get free money and it's not that hard, why not?
Yeah,
but yeah,
definitely. I would even say, get all the subsidies that you can too. It's a hard world out there, and I really admire the people, and some of whom are clients of mine, who have been like, we're going to set this up as a model for how to make this type of farming work with zero subsidies. I'm like, why would you get rid of free money? Go ahead and take the subsidies. Like, okay, I mean, it's just not the cross that I would die on.
Yeah, no, exactly. But like you say, it's about not relying on that model, being self-sustaining first, and then if there's any little benefits in there you can get, then that's fine. Yeah, I think that's the intention here with what Roger Savory is doing too, which I'm all
for it. But again, like, show me the numbers. Do a test project, measure it scrupulously, and invite people to test and to audit and to verify what you've done. And then we'll double down on it when we've seen that work for a couple of seasons, because there's a lot of things that you can do that show really good results in the first few seasons while you're starting on a regenerative trajectory because you've completely changed the management, but then quickly plateau because you're stagnating at a single practice that was not going to take it from this plateau to the next plateau.
Yeah, and it's true with desert regreening because you're starting from such a low baseline that the
Exactly.
potential, which is kind of why I was so interested in it to a degree, because obviously you're going to get a 10,000% increase in biodiversity just by having some grass. So it's just like, go from year one when it's nothing to year 5, 5 years of intense like holistic management.
Yeah.
That's what
it looks like exponential growth. If you go from 0 to 0.5, that's still exponential growth. But can that same way of managing get you from 0.5 to 2 or to 1, or whatever that is? That takes time. And this is why I'm so harping on the measurement thing, and measurements that you don't need outside technology, lots of money, and an external auditor to do. If you can't do it yourself, someone's going to drop the ball. Some of the information is not going to get put in, and you will develop blind spots on the whole in the holistic management that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, exactly. No,
so I want to make this simple, cheap, and easy for everybody, and let's put that information out there and learn together in community. That's what I'm working towards.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, let's see what makes it through the filter after that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's the best way to do it, really. In the meantime, certainly.
I appreciate your digital applause, Miguel. You're my man. And Alberto, you had your hand up, man. That was a long rant we went on there. What's up?
Yeah, no problem. I was just gonna tell Owen, maybe Alejandro Carrillo, he's working pretty good in the Chihuahuan Desert over in Mexico.
I love that guy's stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I was watching a webinar a few months ago, and they did that. They build grazed an old gold mine, and all that sluice coming out that was completely sterile. And I mean, it was just grass bales. I mean, it wasn't nothing special, and they got it to grow. And that was pretty quick. I mean, you don't have to go overboard with it to have results, but it's the continuous work about it that makes it a viable thing about it. And he had all the sale of the cattle and stuff going behind it, so he had a business behind it to do it, and it was only an experiment. So, I mean, grassing the desert sounds great, but there has to be a fundamental business behind it, or no one will get behind it.
I think, well, there is actually. It's just I'm the one wondering if eco credits could be stacked on top. The actual business model is to make profit from the beef, and I think it's to sell to California schools or something he says on his podcast. So it's very much already a business model. I'm just wondering, could that stack on top of it too? But yeah, no, I've seen that work in the mines. That's super interesting stuff. I think Enrique Guerrero, I think his name is. He does that stuff in Mexico as well. The problem is not the problem, but it needs that hay is expensive at scale. So it's like the initial investments to get that thing off the ground is why probably subsidies will have to change to incentivize farmers to just kind of just grow this stuff profitably.
Well, that's why most of these programs start off actually offering the farmers nearby bits and pieces of land, and here you work for it. You work getting with this model, and they just keep on going, and it has to be private. And I think it could stack after a few years when it's stable enough, when the environment is stable enough, like you said, Oliver. From 1 year to the next, you can see a 1 or 2% up in organic matter because you got the animals, you got the grass going in. But if you stop all of it, all of a sudden, it just goes back to zero again.
No, exactly. Yeah, you'd have to ensure it stays in regenerative management after that repair work.
That's why
one thing that I want to say about the certifications and the different schemes out there too is I'm very skeptical, and I really try and look into the ones that have easy or hidden ways to game their system. because a lot of them are over-focused on one or two metrics, whatever it might be. Let's say most of the carbon credits out there, carbon. That's a very limited way of measuring any kind of ecological function and can be gamed. There are a lot of examples out there of people who bought land in order to get carbon credits, razed forests and existing native vegetation, and then started to graze on it and start to improve it from a state that they caused the degradation onto in order to set a lower baseline in order to stack more credit on top of it. It's like,
it's got to come with regulations where like you check the satellite data like back to before they bought it and stuff like that.
And these types of people are always going to be one step ahead of the limited technology that is currently available to really monitor these things. And to me, it takes time to see what these types of incentives actually incentivize. If it incentivizes a whole bunch of very specific and gamed management that is done not for the health of the local community, the resilience of the society around it, but rather just the quick cash and turnover for these types of investments, which we're definitely seeing with these low integrity schemes, it's better not to have them. And so, yeah, there's a few integrity actors out there that are really trying to set a standard, but they're getting bowled over by the investments from VCs that see the cash just rolling through on these, grab quick money and run operations. And I do not currently see the overall effect of all of these new schemes and verifications being positive yet.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. That's not all too different from how I feel about it at the moment. Although I obviously hope for it to be better.
Yeah, again, I'll go back to the yes and kind of thing. Like, put together a good enterprise and get all the support that is currently available, and it's likely to change and adapt necessarily. But be careful not to make the completion of those requirements make your management decisions for you in order to jump through their hoops. That's a bad way to run a business anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we've seen that with CAP. I mean, just a few months ago in February, we were out in the streets fighting for 25% of the money that it was already kind of over. We should have gotten that last year, and here we are fighting it almost a year later to get money from from something we already compromised and did and jumped through the hoops. And yeah.
And I ask you, Alberto, what is that going to make you do the next time they dangle a different incentive in front of you? Are you going to pay attention to it, or are you going to ignore it?
It depends on it depends on how good of an incentive it is. No, but it really depends on, because they dangle a lot of good stuff in front of you, and we are taking advantage of it to a certain degree, and we just have to butt out for a while. I mean, we just can't keep running, and it's it's the stress, it's this, it's that. If it doesn't work, you're gonna get screwed anyway. I mean, it all depends. Yeah.
Well, look, gentlemen, I think it's probably a good time to start wrapping up this evening. I got to make dinner. But I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here and for your awesome questions and your interaction. It helps me to make this stuff better. And we got another one coming up next Friday. Let's go into how to design and build effective experiments on your farm so that you can try out to figure out what actually works, how to do it on a scale that is safe to fail in case what your assumptions are incorrect, and also maximizing for all the possible learnings that you can get from each experiment so that you don't have to repeat them multiple times to reinforce the information. That's what I'm going to cover next week. And whether or not you're interested in joining the program, I am very interested in having you guys as part of my advisory team. Like, it's not just me making this stuff. I am absolutely basing all of the things that go into the program, that go into the resources for the community, on the interactions, the conversations that I have with people in the community. This is a co-creation process. And so if you've ever got ideas, if you've ever got requests, if you've ever got, just concepts of like, it would be nice to have this, I could use help or information on that, bring it to me. This is exactly the feedback I need to continue to develop these things. Whether you're farming, whether you're a consultant, whatever you're doing, all of it's useful. And I love having these conversations. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. I will see you on the community chat and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Oliver.
Yeah.
Really
Bye.
interesting. Thank you. Bye.